Alone kings reign, and princes decree justice, and from whom alone cometh all counsel, wisdom, and understanding. We, thine unworthy servants, here gathered together in thy name, do most humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above, to direct and guide us in all our consultations. And grant that we, having thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interests, all our counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace, and tranquility of the island, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
This Honourable Senate for Friday, November 13th, in the year 2020, is called to order. And before we get into the business of the day, I just comment that it seems to me that this physical arrangement in the Parliament, I don't know how it's going to work, but there you have it. But I suppose it's a result of the times in which we live. And the Parliament has a system of interns, which I think the leader of government business is well aware of and may wish to say something. And there are two interns with us today from the University of the West Indies, I believe. Corey Page Jones, would you stand? And Mr. Javon Monroe, and welcome. There is a third, I think, a young man who is not with us today, but welcome. Madam Leader, I think you wanted to say something.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, thank you also for introducing to the Senate today two of the three new interns in the Parliamentary Internship Program. As members may be aware, the Parliamentary Internship Program is a collaboration between the Houses of Parliament and the Centre for Leadership and Governance of the UAE. So these interns are expected to produce research papers for individual members or for the Parliament as a whole. And they will also conduct research for parliamentary committees and for parliamentary delegations attending international conferences and related events. So senators, when you get that wonderful mail from Ms. Curtis saying that there is X or Y conference on a topic about which you know little, there will be these wonderful, fresh young minds present and ready to support with research. So the Parliament is proud of this program that will give students the opportunity to apply the theory that they've learned to real-world situations in respect of parliamentary activity. And we therefore look forward to them maintaining the usual high standards that we have come to expect from participants in this program. So I invite members of the Senate to once more make them feel welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Senator Scott Motley.
Mr. President, may I join the leader in this welcome? Senator Morris has been saying here sotto voce, if that's possible for him, that one of the interns is a student and is an excellent student, very bright person, so he will add much to the Parliament. I really must applaud the Parliament for the internship program, which I think enhances both groups of persons. One, it gives those who are interning an opportunity to be up close to the parliamentarians and to understand how the Parliament functions and what drives a parliamentarian. At the same time, it does assist in the research and in broadening and deepening the participation of parliamentarians in the functioning of Parliament. Because too often, persons from the outside think it's just about coming and talking and appearing on TV, and they don't see what is necessary in the background, the work which you have to do in order to prepare, and the consultations which you need to have to make sure that the legislation reaches a particular standard which can stand the scrutiny of the courts. So I add my welcome. The opposition senators add their welcome, and we look forward to a very close working relationship, if it pleases you.
Thank you very much. And I just wish to commend as well the UDC and the staff of the Parliament for the hosting of a consultation last evening concerning the construction of the new Parliament facility, which of course, looking at this, really brings home the need for that project, if at all possible, to proceed with some alacrity. I urge members of the Senate that when the next consultation is organized, I urge you all to attend. I attended via Zoom and it was very useful. Senator Morris usually attends these things and has a particular point of view. I noted that he was absent yesterday.
Mr. President, I was absent, but my better half was present.
Okay, perfect. Statements by ministers. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the Senate today are the following: Ministry Paper Number 76 of 2020 and Annual Report of the Office of Utilities Regulation for the financial year 2019-2020. Ministry Paper Number 77 of 2020 and Annual Report on Audited Financial Statements of Jamaica Deposit Insurance Corporation for the years ended March 31, 2017 to 2018 and March 31, 2018 to 2019. Ministry Paper Number 78 of 2020 and Beach Access and Management Policy for Jamaica Cabinet Decision Number 27 of 2020 dated 18th May 2020. Ministry Paper Number 79 of 2020 and Annual Report of the All Island Jamaica Cane Farmers Association for the year ended September 30, 2018. Annual Report on Audited Financial Statements of the Hart NSTA Trust for the financial year 2019-2020. Annual Report of the Culture, Health, Arts, Sports and Education Fund for the financial year 2019-2020. Annual Report of the Runaway Bay Water Company Limited for the year 2012-2013. Annual Report of the Child Protection and Family Support Agency for the year 2016-2017. Annual Report of the University of Technology Jamaica for the year 2017-2018. Annual Report of the Broadcasting Corporation for the year 2019-2020. The Colbeck Irrigation Area Order 2020 and the Colbeck Irrigation Area Order 2020 Resolution. The Electrical Work, Registration and Licensing Regulations 2020 and the Electrical Work Registration and Licensing Resolution 2020. Annual Report of the Early Childhood Commission for the year 2018-2019. Annual Report of the Export-Import Bank of Jamaica Limited for 2019-2020. And Jamaica Hansard Parliamentary Proceedings of the Honourable Senate, Sessions 2015, dated January 23, 2015 to December 11, 2015.
Thank you very much. Before I go to the next item, it completely slipped me to welcome back our Marshal, who you knew was ill. Captain Blake, welcome back, and we are happy that you overcame the difficulties that you were having. Bills brought from the Honourable House of Representatives.
The following is a message from the Speaker of the House of Representatives to the Honourable Senate. I have the honour to advise the Honourable Senate that on the 27th day of October 2020, the House of Representatives agreed to the Senate amendments to a bill entitled An Act to Implement the Convention abolishing the requirement of legislation for foreign public documents done at The Hague on the 5th day of October 1961 and for connected matters. I also have the honor to advise the Honourable Senate that on the 10th day of November 2020, a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Revenue Administration Act was passed in the House of Representatives. Signed, Marissa Dalrymple Philibert MP, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Petitions? No. I'm sorry.
Mr. President, I signify my willingness to take charge of the bill.
A bill shortly entitled the Revenue Administration Act, the Revenue Administration Amendment Act 2020, read a first time.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice of second reading of the bill.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the Senate, I will move the following motions. The Electricity, Electrical Work, Registration and Licensing Regulations 2020 Resolution. Whereas, by virtue of Section 55 of the Electricity Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, the Minister may, from time to time, make regulations under the Act, and whereas on the first day of October 2020, the Minister made the Electricity, Electrical Work, Registration and Licensing Regulations 2020, and whereas it is provided by Section 55(2) of the Act that regulations made under the Act shall be subject to affirmative resolution, now therefore be it resolved by this Honourable Senate as follows. 1. This resolution may be cited as the Electricity, Electrical Work, Registration and Licensing Regulation 2020 Resolution. And 2. The Electricity, Electrical Work, Registration and Licensing Regulations 2020, which were laid on the table of the Senate on the 13th day of November 2020, are hereby affirmed. Be it resolved, with reference to the resolution approved by this Honourable Senate, on the 9th day of October 2020, appointing a special select committee to sit jointly with a similar committee appointed by the House of Representatives to consider and report on a bill shortly entitled the Sexual Harassment Act 2020, that the names Kamina Johnson-Smith and Sophia Fraser-Binns be added thereto. Be it resolved that this Honourable Senate appoint a special select committee comprising the following members: Honourable Senator Leslie Campbell, Senator Natalie Campbell-Rodriguez, Senator Shireen Golding-Campbell, Senator Delroy Williams, Senator Damian Crawford, Senator Dr. Floyd Morris, to sit jointly with a similar committee appointed by the House of Representatives to consider and report on the motion for consideration of a proposal that the City Municipality of Portmore become the 15th parish of Jamaica. And whereas Section 26(1) of the Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures Act 2017 requires that the Act be reviewed from time to time by a committee of both Houses of Parliament appointed for the purpose, be it resolved that this Honourable Senate appoint a select committee comprising the following members: Honourable Senator Matthew Samuda, Senator Charles Sinclair, Senator Shireen Golding Campbell, Senator Donna Scott Motley, Senator Lambert Brown, to sit jointly with a similar committee appointed by the House to consider and report on the Act. Mr. President, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today I will move for the suspension of standing orders to enable me to take the motions.
Thank you, Minister.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice at the next meeting of the Senate, I will move the following motion. Callback Irrigation Order 2020 Resolution. Whereas by virtue of Section 3(1) of the Irrigation Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, the Minister may by order subject to affirmative resolution declare any area specified in the order to be an irrigation area. And whereas on the 13th of October 2020, the Minister made a callback irrigation area order 2020, and whereas it is desirable that the callback irrigation area order 2020 be affirmed, now therefore be it resolved by this Honourable Senate as follows. This resolution may be cited as the callback irrigation area order 2020 resolution. 2. The callback irrigation area order 2020, which was laid on the table of the Senate on the 13th day of November 2020, is hereby affirmed. Mr. President, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to make this motion.
Thank you very much. Questions and answers to questions? Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to the sitting of the Senate. Motions for leave to introduce bills. The presentation of the bills without leave of the Senate first obtained. Public business. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I now beg, with your leave, Mr. President, for suspension of the standing orders to allow me to take the motions, notice of which I gave earlier.
Members have heard the question. Those in favour? Against?
Mr. President, may I ask first that the second, third, and fourth motions which have been proposed, that is the motions in respect of the committee to review the ZOSO Act, the committee to review the motion for consideration of the proposal regarding Portmore, and the motion regarding the additions to the Sexual Harassment Prevention Act. Could those motions be approved, Mr. President?
Members would have heard the Minister. All in favour? Against?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, before I start the matter before us, which is the regulations in respect of the Electricity Act, I just wish to thank members for their cooperation. Thank you. Thank you. To thank members for their cooperation in agreeing to have the regulations circulated beforehand so that they could be tabled and taken today, to allow for the business of the Senate to be conducted efficiently in these pandemic circumstances where we do try to limit our movement where possible. I'm not sure where this feedback is coming from. There's stuff. Okay. Just use one? All right, let's see how that goes. Thank you. Yes, Mr. President, I appreciate cooperation on both sides. The regulations are hefty reading, but no members had received copies under the last session. That is prior to the dissolution of Parliament. It had been tabled, but we had been unable to take it at that time. Can we proceed with this interference? Is everyone able to? All right. Thank you, Mr. Marshall. But that brings us, Mr. President, to address the regulations themselves. That is, regulations made pursuant to Section 55(1) of the Electricity Act, entitled, as indicated, the Electrical Work Registration and Licensing Regulations 2020, which aim at digitizing, modernizing, and transforming the electrical inspection process and seeks to increase regulatory efficiency in relation to electricians. In this context, Mr. President, Jamaicans will be assured of technically sound and compliant work conducted and passed by competent and regulated electricians and inspectors within a reasonable time frame. So to provide some background, Mr. President, under the Electric Lighting Act 1890, it was a requirement for electricity inspections to be conducted by the government. And this was undertaken by the GEI, the Government Electrical Inspectorate, a department under the ministry responsible for energy. And the GEI, headed by a chief electrical inspector, is responsible for conducting safety inspections of all electrical installations. And only those installations so certified were allowed to be connected to the country's electricity system. In August 2015, the Electricity Act was promulgated, providing for the privatization of the electricity inspections function and the establishment of a government electrical regulator, the GER. So with the passing of the Electricity Act 2015, the 1890 Act was repealed. So under the Electricity Act, the one which we have now, the GER is designated the regulator for the work that is done by licensed electrical inspectors and registered electricians in relation to electrical installations, wiring, or works. So the GER will have responsibility for, or has responsibility for, vetting license applications from persons desirous of being licensed as inspectors and making recommendations to the Minister of Energy, the registration of electricians, the monitoring of work done by inspectors, recommending revocations or suspensions of licenses of inspectors and registered electricians, investigating and seeking to resolve complaints regarding work or conduct of licensed inspectors, and conducting random audits of installations certified by licensed inspectors. Furthermore, Mr. President, and in respect of the registration of electricians, the GER will also be responsible to appoint a committee of examiners that will assume the functions previously carried out by the Board of Examiners, that is the administration of exams for the registration of electricians. So, Mr. President, the whole process, the framework for registration of electricians and the ability to access, or the means by which we access electricity has been somewhat archaic. It has not kept pace with Jamaica's developmental needs. And due to the increase in the rate of electrification across the island and also the increase in commercial activities, there has been an increase in demand in the number of persons seeking to be connected to the grid. I understand, Mr. President, that they receive close to 35,000 applications for inspection annually, but there are very few inspectors. So these regulations will provide a framework which will allow for an increase in the number of licensed inspectors available, which will be a massive improvement in our developmental capacity. Mr. President, what occurs now is that the delays between submission of work for inspection and actual inspection are almost always unduly lengthy and frustrating for residential customers. Commercial entities seeking inspection are also adversely impacted. So Jamaicans will be pleased to note that the regulations will be implemented, or the process will be implemented, through a digital platform that will ensure quick applications, quick notifications and alerts where there are issues or actions to be taken, seamless uploads and updating of their records, and the provision of feedback on applications. So the process will be taking us a leap step forward, not just a document that's going to be passed by this Senate and the Law House, but certainly a new process that will allow for the facilitation of electrical approvals, inspections and approvals. So, Mr. President, with regards to electricians, these regulations, the process provided by them, will allow for their registration and lay a framework for them to engage in continuing professional development as well. So electricians can be confident that they have their work inspected properly and certified so they can finalize jobs and move on to the next, so they can do more business in good time. And of note is also the possibility for individuals to be registered as both inspectors and electricians, although of course, as you will hear when we go through, you can't inspect your own work. That will be a part of the process. So regarding the technical electrical assistant, Mr. President, and you'll hear more about this level of participant, I'm sure we would all have encountered them as the apprentice who comes to a site with the senior electrician and they're learning on the job. They will now have a formalized framework as well, and this will be an opportunity to, in fact, build out more structured apprenticeship programs, allowing for them to be formally engaged, formally trained, and to lift themselves up and move up the line in terms of doing better and doing more as registered and regulated professionals. The fees laid out in the regulations, Mr. President, are well within reach of persons who are already engaged in the industry and those who may wish to join. So, Mr. President, it is in this positive context that I now move to working through the clauses of the regulations. I think I'm going to have to, it's too long for me to go all the way with mask. So, sorry. Mr. President, Regulation 1, of course, gives a formal name. Regulation 2 sets out definitions for terms throughout the bill, including that of an electrician, an inspector, and a regulator, all of whom are defined in the Act, in the regulations, pardon me. And the regulator is, for the purposes of these regulations, the government electrical regulator established under the Act. Regulation 3, Mr. President, indicates that the regulations are not applicable to matters like certain electrical wirings or apparatus in a vehicle or a vessel. So this is not relevant to the wiring within motor vehicles or within boats or other means of transport. This is about building wiring. Mr. President, it will not apply to electrical or electromechanical devices, apparatus, or material manufactured solely for export or imported solely for re-export. So this is about matters that are taking place or operating domestically, electrical works operating domestically. And there will also be some specific self-contained generating sets that are also excluded. Mr. President, Regulation 4 establishes the roles in very clear fashion for the minister, the regulator, the committee of examiners, the inspector, the electrician, and the technical electrical assistant. So it's an easy read to see the responsibilities for each under this Act. And Part 3, Mr. President, deals generally with licensing, registration, and enrollment. And this encompasses Regulations 5 to 27. And Regulation 5, Mr. President, deals with the application. It requires licensing as a prerequisite to performance of inspection functions and specifies the application process for such licensing. So this is the inspector's license. A person may be licensed as an inspector by submitting to the regulator a completed application along with the requisite documents in accordance with the Form 1 under the first schedule. The regulator shall review the application on receipt, and if the applicant has met the requirements, then the regulator recommends to the minister that the license be granted. Subparagraphs of Regulation 5 also provide for requests for further information, the giving of reasons to the minister for any dissatisfaction with an application, and offenses in relation to the application process. Regulation 6 deals with the grant of refusal of license. Mr. President, Regulation 6 provides the Minister with the discretion to grant or refuse a license, Mr. President. And it also speaks to 3 classes of licenses which exist, the Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3, which are based on the voltage requirements relevant to each class of professional. So, Mr. President, it sets out the 3 classes that may be granted to successful applicants on payment of the fee. And as stated before, they not only relate to voltage levels, but power levels at which the electrical work or modification is to be energized. Mr. President, Regulation 7 deals with the duration, terms, and conditions of license. It states that the license issued by the Minister shall be valid for 2 years, unless suspended, revoked, or surrendered, and it is non-transferable. Regulation 8 deals with public liability insurance, Mr. President, and requires that on being granted a license, an inspector is required to obtain public liability insurance for the duration of the license from an insurer registered under the Insurance Act. It also speaks or specifies the insurance value for each class of license granted. And Mr. President, this is a welcome development as it brings the industry in line with others and demonstrates the government's commitment to strengthening consumer protection so that indeed if someone is coming to inspect your property, they should be insured so that if there are any difficulties, whatever they have certified, they can stand behind the inspection that has been granted to a consumer. Mr. President, Regulation 9 deals with the appeal of a decision not to grant a license. It establishes the right to appeal and outlines the appeal process. Regulation 10 deals with suspension or revocation of license, Mr. President, and it sets out the circumstances in which a license may be suspended or revoked. Regulation 11 stipulates the manner in which a license is to be surrendered, making particular use of a notice to the Minister of the intention to surrender, which is set out in the 4th schedule. Regulation 10 deals with renewal of license requirements, Mr. President. A licensee may apply for renewal within 3 months before the expiration of their license, and whereas the applicant has completed the specified courses, because you have to do some courses by an approved institution, after which the regulation recommends grant of the license. So we note, Mr. President, that there will be, there's mind, there's heart, there's UTech, there's university, there are all sorts of colleges and institutions who undoubtedly will find now a market for offering courses for accreditation by the regulator to allow for certification, or rather recertification of those who are licensed under this regulation. Mr. President, in respect of Regulation 13, an inspector must notify the regulator of any change or impending change to his particulars to ensure appropriate monitoring by the regulator. And Regulation 14 takes us to registration of electricians. So it speaks to the process for an electrician to be registered in order to undertake electrical work or modification, or to submit an electrical line diagram or electrical design, or to supervise technical electrical assistance. A person may be registered as an electrician by submitting to the regulator a completed application along with the documentation required under Form 2 of the 1st schedule. Regulation 15 speaks to the grant or refusal of registration, again in respect of the 3 categories. And as was the case with inspectors, Mr. President, the distinction between the categories again surrounds voltage level and power levels at which the electrical work or modification is to be energized. And the regulator may refuse to grant an application for registration if the applicant is not certified by the Committee of Examiners. So that's at this first registration. Mr. President, under Regulation 16, which deals with the terms and conditions of registration and the duration, the license to be issued is also for 2 years unless suspended, revoked, or surrendered, and it's non-transferable. And in respect of an appeal, Mr. President, Regulation 17 outlines the appeal process and the 2 options at the regulator's disposal in terms of making a determination in respect of the appeal. Regulation 18 deals with suspension and revocation of the license, and Regulation 19 deals with deregistration. So an electrician who wishes to deregister has to submit a form to the regulator that's set out in the 4th schedule. Mr. President, in respect of renewal of registration for electricians, they too must apply or may apply within 3 months prior to the expiration of their registration, and determining whether or not to approve the renewal. The Committee of Examiners is required to consider whether or not the applicant has completed specific courses for training conducted by an approved institution, including continuing education and electrical safety courses, before registration is granted. So the Committee of Examiners won't actually examine for a renewal, but they will verify that you have done the requisite courses at institutions that are accredited. Mr. President, Regulation 21 requires for changes of particulars of the registrant to also be provided to the regulator as soon as practicable. And in respect of Regulation 22, we move to enrollment of technical electrical assistants. So this Regulation 22 specifies a process, Mr. President, for a technical electrical assistant to be enrolled to assist in either the carrying out of an inspection or the carrying of electrical work or modification, or both. And the technical electrical assistant must operate at all times under the supervision of an electrician. A person may be so enrolled by submitting to the committee a completed application in accordance with Form 3, together with the application fee set out in the 2nd schedule. And Mr. President, 23 speaks to the the enrollment terms, duration, terms and conditions. This enrollment is valid for 5 years unless suspended, revoked, or surrendered. You can anticipate that it happens at a lower level. This is in terms of their likely earnings and their level of operation. The intention is to ensure that there's less of a bureaucracy for them to remain active and to provide services and to earn as well. So it's a 5-year license provision for them. Regulation 24, Mr. President, deals with appeals, suspensions, revocations, surrenders, and renewals of enrollment. And 25, Mr. President, is the regulation which provides that an inspector or an electrician may at any time be required by a regulator to provide a list of persons under their supervision. And failure to comply with that is a summary offense with a fine not exceeding $500,000, Mr. President, because clearly if you are supposed to be supervising someone or someone is purporting to be supervised by you in order to provide a service which is important to safety, it's important to consumer safety and citizen safety, then this must be treated quite seriously. So the regulator must at all times know who purports to be supervised by you and vice versa. Mr. President, Regulation 26 clarifies, as I mentioned earlier, that a person can be registered as an electrician and hold an inspector's license. But it provides here that an inspector shall not inspect or certify his own work or modification. And the fine for this is up to an amount not exceeding $5 million or imprisonment not exceeding 2 years. Because clearly, Mr. President, if you are seeking to sign off on the work that you yourself have done, this could be problematic, to say the least. Mr. President, offense of working without a license and registration, that is created under Regulation 27. So if a person fraudulently represents himself to be licensed, registered, or enrolled, or as having performed or an activity for which he is duly licensed, registered, or enrolled that he did not perform, this again, this person may be liable to a fine not exceeding $5 million or imprisonment not exceeding 2 years. Mr. President, Part 4 takes us to the Committee of Examiners and Examinations, and this is Regulations 28 to 30. Regulation 28 sets out the composition of the Committee of Examiners, lays down their requisite qualifications. 29 speaks to their conduct of meetings and their decision-making processes. And Regulation 30 requires of the committee to conduct examinations of all applicants for first-time registration under the regulations. So the intention is not for the government to create a whole industry around for itself. It will do first-time examinations, but then renewals will all be dealt with, or the courses for them rather can be done elsewhere. Part 5 deals with electrical work inspection and compliance, Mr. President, and this is Regulations 31 to 52. Regulation 31 highlights compliance with the specifications in respect to electrical work or modification. It sets out that if for any reason electrical work does not meet specifications, a single buyer, supply licensee, or self-generator may be required to disconnect the electricity supply, and where the electricity supply is not yet provided, the electrician concerned is to replace or remedy the electrical work. While Regulation 32 sets out the requirements for electrical work done in connection with the initial supply of electrical power or a modification to any premises. In this instance, an electrical line diagram is to be completed for a generation set that utilizes DC power. In addition, this electrical line diagram or electrical design must be certified by a registered professional electrical engineer under the Professional Engineers Registration Act before commencement of the electrical work or modification. Mr. President, Regulation 33 deals with notification of completion of electrical work, and it speaks to the electrician inputting in the digital system and submitting within 48 hours a copy of the work completion certificate, and the regulator should notify the owner that he may proceed to apply to an inspector for the inspection and certification of the electrical work or modification. The digital system will streamline the process and reduce customers' wait time and confusion about the process. So you won't be submitting and you have to be calling and find out whose desk this is on or whether it has gone from one desk to the other, etc. There's a digital process where alerts will move the system along along the process line. Mr. President, Regulation 34 deals with liability, and it holds an electrician liable for his own actions and those of any technical electrical assistant under the electrician's supervision. It mandates that the electrician is to effect appropriate corrective measures where the electrician A, creates or allows the continued breaches of specification, or B, issues a work completion certificate that does not comply with the specification. So you can't just bring an apprentice on the site and don't look at what's being done. You are responsible for overseeing the work that's being done on your watch. So not only your work, but the work which you are purporting to supervise. So again, it's a focus on public safety, Mr. President. Regulation 35 deals with the interface with the digital system, and it stipulates that an inspector is to upload to the digital system all information relating to the inspection. Regulation 36 deals with engagement of an inspector. So the owner may engage an inspector to inspect the electrician's work or modification. 37 speaks to the compliance certificate that should be granted by the inspector on completion. Compliance certificates, Mr. President, are valid for 15 years in the case of a public space and 25 years in any other case. Regulation 38, Mr. President, states that an inspector who completes an inspection and is not satisfied with the electrical work or the modification is to notify the owner in writing with the reasons for the unsatisfactory findings and input the results of the inspection into the digital system. So there's transparency, and the owner of property must understand what's happening and what's wrong with the work that has been done. Regulation 39 creates the offense where an inspector certifies a premises that he has not visited or found to be in breach of the specification. So a person who commits the aforementioned offense may be liable to a fine not exceeding $2 million or imprisonment not exceeding 2 years, and to have the inspector's license revoked. So again, the focus is public safety, Mr. President. Persons who purport to do work must do it, and there is strong liability and penalty in the event that they do not. Mr. President, Regulation 40 outlines the circumstances in which an inspector may issue temporary or partial inspection certificate, which shall be valid for a period of not exceeding 3 months at a time, to allow for other works to be done. Mr. President, Regulation 41 states that a regulator may conduct random reviews of electrical work or modification that has been inspected by an inspector. And again, I've cleared that's quality control and audit obligations. Mr. President, regulations 42 to 44 speak to reporting breaches, and citing a breach, and rectifying a breach, respectively. 45 speaks to reinspection of premises. It provides that within 6 months before a compliance certificate expires, the owner should engage or is to engage an inspector to re-inspect the premises. Remember, it's 15 for public space and 25 years for any other space. Regulation 46, Mr. President, states that the regulator is to issue at least 2 weeks before the expiration of a compliance certificate a notice of the date of expiration of the compliance certificate to the single buyer, supply licensee, or the self-generator. And Mr. President, Regulation 47 outlines that those 3 persons are also to engage an inspector to undertake an inspection prior to interconnection of the system. Regulation 48 speaks to energizing premises, and Regulation 49 speaks to the prohibition of energizing without a compliance certificate. And that, in that circumstance, Mr. President, again, we have a fine of $5 million or imprisonment not exceeding 2 years. Regulation 50 prohibits the 3 categories of buyers. So the single buyer, the supply licensee, the single buyer or the supply licensee, the 2, from continuing to supply electricity to any premises that is deemed unsafe by an inspector or not in compliance with a specification. And regulations 51 and 52 speak to complaints and investigation. It allows any aggrieved person in relation to an electrical work to complain to the regulator, and allows the regulator to carry out an investigation and recommend necessary actions. The regulator is also empowered to act where a court finds that an inspector or electrician has caused the death of a person or loss or damage to any property through negligence or through willful act or omission. 52 requires that before any action can be taken under 51, the regulator is to notify the inspector or the electrician confirmed. Part 6 is a miscellaneous section, Mr. President. It speaks to access to the digital system. So the regulator is to provide access to the system to the 3 categories of persons who use this type of electrical work, the single buyer, supply licensee, and self-generator, or the owner, for the purposes of viewing the completion certificates and compliance certificates. Regulation 5 allows them to report an incident report the incident to the regulator, and this report is to be made within 24 hours of occurrence. Electrical work on transmission and distribution lines is dealt with under Regulation 55, Mr. President, and it provides that the single buyer or supply licensee is to carry out work in accordance with the specifications on transmission and distribution lines, and to keep a record of all works carried out and to make them available to the regulator. Regulation 56 speaks to the revocation of previous regulations, application for licenses, rules 1929, the electric lighting regulations 1922, the electric lighting licensing of electricians regulations 1958, and the electric lighting fees regulations 1984, all of which are still in effect. Mr. President, Regulation 57 provides for savings and transitional provisions. It provides that no proceedings for breach of Regulation 5.1 during the period of 2 years after coming into effect of these regulations. So during the first 2 years of operations of these regulations, no proceedings for a breach of the Regulation 5.1 are to be brought against public officers who immediately before the coming into operation of these regulations is already duly authorized as an electrical inspector. So an electrical inspector not licensed under these regulations has 2 years to bring themselves under these regulations. Mr. President, very briefly, the schedules. First schedule has 3 forms. First is license application form for inspectors. In the 3 classes, Form 2, registration application form for an electrician. In the 3 categories, Form 3 is the enrollment application form for the technical electrical assistant. Second schedule, Mr. President, provides for the fees for the various application fees. You see that an application fee for the inspector is $15,000, electrician $10,000, and enrollment of technical electrical assistants, 3,000. Mr. President, for the license fees for the inspectors, also provided in the 3 categories, electricians and the technical electrical assistant. The examination fees are also there, Mr. President, for the new license and new registration. The 3rd schedule, Mr. President, is referred to in Regulations 14 and 22. It's divided into 3 parts. Part 1 sets out the qualifications for an inspector for the 3 types of licenses. Part 2 sets out the qualifications for an electrician for the 3 categories. And Part 3, the qualification required for the technical electrical assistant. Mr. President, the 4th schedule also provides the form of notice to be provided by inspectors and the technical electrical assistant of their intention to surrender license or enrollment, or an electrician's request to deregister pursuant to Regulations 11 and 19 respectively. So, Mr. President, it is intended through the passing of these regulations to facilitate the modernization and efficiency of the electricity sector, to increase compliance and industry safety, and therefore, of course, also increase public safety, and to improve Jamaica's competitiveness in doing business in the global sphere. The government will be unburdened of some of the operational aspects of conducting physical inspections within the electrical works industry while maintaining quality and standards through regulation. For the first time, we will be regulating electricians as well. And again, in line with our philosophy, our philosophical outlook, we are creating the space for the private sector to also play its part by taking advantage of opportunities to expand training programs or to become recognized training centers. We should note, Mr. President, as well, that the regulations will create a more business and investment-friendly environment. The World Bank Group's 2020 edition of Doing Business report ranks Jamaica at 120 for the measure Getting Electricity. And these regulations will vastly improve the procedural experience, both for residential and business applicants, and free up time for productivity. So, Mr. President, in this context, I seek the support of members of this Honourable Chamber in respect of these regulations. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Scott Motley.
Mr. President, it is ironic that just this morning we were introduced to the parliamentary interns, and as I listened to the leader go through these regulations, I thought, I wish they had been here earlier. It is a highly technical matter, Mr. President. So happy the Marshal is back so I can have all these niceties done over here. It is a highly technical matter which requires a lot of expertise to be able to embrace. But what is clear from reading the regulations is the intention, which is to ensure that the public enjoys a certain level of protection. We all know the dangers that can occur if your electricity supply is not connected in a safe way, or if inferior material is utilized. It's not just that it is that you can lose your property, but you can actually lose your life. Mr. President, what is remarkable is that we have functioned for so long in this manner. Because when you think that you have 35,000 applications on an annual basis, and you will have roughly only about 9 inspectors servicing the entire island, you will see that the challenges that arise. And sometimes, regrettably, you can understand why there might be shortcuts, because that is part of what has been the complaint from the public, that the inspections might not take place, that the work might not be of the quality which was envisaged, and that persons might just sign a paper. Now we have come to a system, a very detailed and indeed elaborate system, which I think will prevent that. I myself, Mr. President, wrestled with the term of who is a self-generator, who is a single buyer, and who is a supply licensee, because Obviously, there are persons in the industry who might know exactly to whom that refers, but there was not in the definition section, we do not have the opportunity of somebody like me trying to understand what it was we were trying to accomplish, having a guidance as to a definition there. Mr. President, the aspect of continuing education, as most people who know me know that I am a proponent of that, and I commend those who thought of including it, because as technology advances, we have to keep pace with it. As these developments take place in any sphere, we have to keep abreast of it. I had the most unfortunate experience. You know, you can hardly find persons who are qualified and certified. So how we do it is that we call a friend and say, do you know a good fridge man? Or do you know a man who can fix a washing machine? I'm sure that Senator Hill, even he sometimes resort to that. So we have a sort of list. Because I know, Senator, that your wife is the one who runs your household. So I had this experience where I needed somebody to come and look at my fridge, and somebody came who was highly recommended. When he came into the house, his eyes boggled, and then he looked at it. There was some ice forming in an area where it shouldn't be. And while he was telling me about warning a client of his, don't use anything in your fridge to stick it, he took out something that looked like a screwdriver and started sticking the ice behind that had formed. I didn't know quite how to handle it, whether I should just be gracious and calm, or whether I should give rise to my baser instinct and start screaming at him. Needless to say, when he offered to look at my washing machine and also to check my dryer, I was very gracious, and I told him, thank you very much for your assistance. I was, grateful. I'm sorry you couldn't help me with the fridge. But there's a clear perspective to which we come when we know how important it is that we have persons who keep abreast of all the developments. You can't have started out 10 years ago, worked only on things that are, of that era, and not ensure that you develop your skills. The digital platform also, the fact of the automation and the inputs so that you can access and you can follow up on your application rather than making telephone calls, trying to find persons, and so is also something that I think is admirable. I don't know, though, and I would like, Leader, when we're dealing with it, can I, as a member of the public, how much of that information can I access? Is it only meant for the person who has an application pending, or could I go, for example, and not only find out who are the qualified inspectors, who are the qualified electricians, who are the qualified technical assistants, but be able to evaluate them based on whether there's a complaint, as is provided in the regulations for somebody who has used inferior material, for example, so that I can, as a customer, come to my conclusions from carrying out an analysis of exactly the approach which this particular electrician or inspector took. That I would like to know, because I think it would be, if we could do that, it would ensure that the standards are met and ensure that there's a level of accountability on their parts, because they're going to be more careful if they know that a customer, a potential client, is carrying out a search within this within this automated, within this digital platform. The issue of public liability insurance. When I was trying to find out from a friend of mine who is an electrical engineer exactly how the industry viewed the impact of some aspects of the regulations. One of the things that I wanted to find out is, in what circumstances would you hold a person accountable? Say, if the house is on fire. I will tell you that the response was a little bit disconcerting, because they said, well, they usually blame JPS. They usually say, but it's not my fault, it's JPS' fault. Or they would usually say, he says, even if a light bulb goes bad the day after, and you return it and make a complaint, they would say, oh, it must be something to do with JPS. So this public liability insurance will, I think, empower persons a little bit more. They will know that they are protected, they have something to fall back on, they're not going to lose their entire lives because an error has been made. And I think that this is very good for the public, this is very important protection, and this is a step in the right direction. But it's not that I am totally supportive of all aspects of the regulations. I found that in clause, I think it was clause 10, in clause 10, if you'll give me a moment. Clause 10 is the clause that deals with the suspension or the revocation of a license. And if you look at it, you will find that at 10b, there are very specific areas in which it can be revoked. Usually in circumstances where the court, for example, has found an inspector guilty of directly causing the death of a person through negligence, or a court has found the inspector that in the course of the duties, the inspector caused loss or damage to any person or property, and so on. But this section, it does not allow for a right of appeal where a license is suspended or revoked. And I cannot understand the circumstances where that would not be provided for. Because indeed, the reason why I raised the ones about the court action is because there are other circumstances under which it can be revoked. And one of the circumstances, for example, is where the regulator determines that the inspector is in breach of a term or condition of the license, or in contravention of a provision of the Act or the regulations, and the breach or contravention cannot be remedied in accordance with directions issued to the inspector by the regulator, or the inspector has not complied, and so on. So there are subjective aspects to it, compared with a clear determination by the court. There are things in which a regulator can come to a conclusion. And I do believe that as is done otherwise and consistently throughout the regulations, there should also be a right of appeal in those circumstances. The other thing that I wanted to inquire about, because it struck me, was the schedule. The qualifications. The qualifications for, now we have different categories of registration, so, and different categories of license. So, for example, we have a Class 1 license, a Class 2 license, a Class 3 license, and naturally, there's going to be more educational requirements depending on what class you're in. Similarly, in the qualifications for an electrician, you also have a separation into Category 1, Category 2, and Category 3, with Category 1 being the highest. But Minister, Category 1, a diploma in electrical engineering from a recognized training institution approved by an accreditation body, and we know the accreditation body has been established and so on as to who can do the accreditation. But at least 15 years practical experience? This one requires at least 15 years practical experience in electrical work, evidenced by a voluntary declaration of an electrician or inspector with whom the applicant has worked. The others, the category 2, which requires a diploma in electrical engineering or an equivalent from a recognized training institution, of course approved, requires 5 years, the successful completion of an examination. The category 2 has a different requirement. But I submit, Minister, that 15 years is a stretch, and that a more reasonable... Senator Brown is suggesting that we could put on somebody extra. You said a year? I wasn't listening closely, or I would not have cited him. I don't think it is as extreme as putting the 1 before the 5. But I do believe, Minister, that is onerous. I cannot see how anybody would aspire to this if you have to go through this for 15 years. And I would ask that perhaps you consider if that is what was intended. For you, Senator, 15 years for a woman is a very long time. And of course, as with everything that we do here, there has to be a component of public education. We need to find a way for persons, the public, who will be seeking these services to understand what is required of an electrician or what is required of an inspector. I mean, seriously, to ask them, can I see your badge? Can I see your license? We have to start doing that to ensure that the person who has been sent to work on your property is indeed qualified. So that's the first thing that I would want them to be told. Ask, when you have an electrician come to your premises, ask them to produce their license. I mean, that would be absolutely transformational in terms of our approach to actually doing business, that everybody knows they have to produce it and everybody knows they should ask for it. In particular, in relation to the automated system, we should know what we can access. We should know how we can access it. And I'm asking that the ministry include in its planning a public education component. In saying all of this, Mr. President, as I said at the outset, when we embark on this type of transformation, it augurs well for the ease of doing business. It gives a certain level of confidence. And I am happy that the scope, the amount of inspectors and the amount of electricians will be broadened. Because especially in this new dispensation, we need people to be attracted to different kinds of professions where they can really make a living. And not only that, but we need to embark upon a new sense of professionalism about whatever we do, no matter what it is that we are doing. And I think that if we do this the right way and we begin to get the public on our side, we can build a new culture, which is so important for Jamaica to achieve its fullest potential. If it pleases you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Scott Motley. Senator Sinclair.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, when I got the regulations that we are discussing this morning, and I thought electricity, what came to my mind was house, buildings. And when I started going through the regulations, Regulation 3 actually confirm that is where we were in this particular, would be in this particular discussion, as it limits the regulations to certain types of issues. And it, as the minister leader said, relating to structures. But then that thought brought me back to what was said by the Honourable Prime Minister when he spoke about every man must build a house. And in fact, it was in 2015 in Granville, your community, Senator Allen, where the Honourable Prime Minister said the Labour Party believes that every man must build a house. Every man must build his castle. And he believes that in doing that building, it is to be done brick by brick to get the best value for money. Mr. President, the construction of a dwelling house, or any structure for that matter, including that for commercial use, is a remarkable achievement. But in doing that, we have to consider the issue of safety. And I think that this regulation is driving that particular principle, a principle of safety. And when one looks on the comments made by the Honourable Minister Darryl Vaz in the lower house, when he said that these regulations will facilitate the modernization and efficiency of the electricity sector, increase compliance and industry safety, and improve Jamaica's competitiveness in doing business in the global sphere, confirms that as one of the guiding principles of these regulations. And since I've been in this Senate, we have dealt with the Building Act, because that also deals with an issue of safety. And when we are doing structures, how it is that we should go about doing those structures. In fact, under the Building Act, there is a requirement that speaks to registration of draftsmen and other persons that will participate in the building industry. And what I would seek to encourage us as an administration is that the regulation, just as we are dealing with these regulations under the Electricity Act, and when one considers the fact, I mean, we are slow. It seems that we move at a slow pace at times, because the Electricity Act under which these regulations were spawned was passed in 2015. And it is now 2020, and we are coming with regulations to improve efficiency in the system and the safety. And in the same way that we are doing this at this time, I would urge us as an administration that we move along quickly, as expeditiously as we can, in respect to getting the regulations that need to be done under the Building Act also. The issues of safety, location, critical. And what we have seen in the past few weeks, and I've heard the comments, there have been some criticisms as to the comments that have been made by the Honourable Prime Minister in respect to the creation of no-bill zones, and be serious about it. I want to stand in full support of the comments made by the Honourable Prime Minister when he says that we should not allow persons to build in certain areas. Build your house, but consider safety. And let us, as an administration, as a government, let us determine and assist persons in ensuring that where they build, what they build, and how they build, it must be done in a safe manner. Mr. President, we must consider also, as we move along, in respect to issues of safety, how we deal with the environment. But in going through these regulations, I want to start out by commending the drafters, because I've seen sometimes certain legislation that I go through because I am in the field of law, regulations, legislation, that you have some difficulty in reading. It may say subject to subsection so and so, and you have to turn so many pages to get an understanding of what it is that is trying to, the legislation is seeking to convey. But this regulation, comprehensive, very simple in reading, very well ordered, easily understood. And leader of government business, you made a comment regarding the definitions, that you did not see them in the regulations. I will just ask you to look to the principal act under which the regulations, these regulations are from. The principal act speaks to and defines the issues that you had raised. So that is where you will find single buyer, etc. The definitions are there in clear and precise terms, right? I also want to commend the approach that leads to the liberalization of the sector. I mean, when I got into and was involved in a construction project, to find an electrician, to find an inspector, to come and expeditiously get your thing passed so that you can get connected and occupy your house. Especially, it was the first time for me, so I was very excited about it. And the person who did the work said, well, we have to get an inspector from the government electrical inspector's department. And I am calling him and say, so when this person went to come, why can't I just move ahead quickly? I want to go occupy my house. It took me some time, but eventually we got the process through. So the liberalization, it affords opportunities to persons who meet the required standards. And so I find that to be a good introduction. The issue of fines, as again we come back to safety, and I have always said in my presentations here that I don't look at the penalties. A lot of times I don't pay too much attention to that, because you won't find yourself penalized if you abide by what is required. And so the penalties, some may say that they are excessive, $5 million, $500,000 minimum, in respect to some offenses under the regulations. It is there to encourage compliance and to deter persons from going outside what speaks to safety. And whilst I was looking at this particular issue, I'm preempting Senator Brown. preempting Senator Brown. Because he always comments, and says that... Very, very. When Senator Brown, you always comment about the fines onerous, or sometimes that there's a double whammy effect. I think that is how you actually... not double whammy, the double whammy effect. Fines and confinement. So because there's a principal act, I went back and looked at the principal act, which was passed when you were sitting on this side in 2015, and found that you participated in a double whammy under the Electricity Act. You agree with it then? But because you have moved over to that side, when it comes from this side, you don't agree?
I have disagreed with it then.
You disagreed with it then? Because when I looked under Section 58 of the Principal Act, you have a $5 million fine, but you can get fined and confined. And I said, Senator Brown could not have been over here advocating that the party of which he is a part is against the. But you incorporate all of you at times. But in any event, so as I said, when we're looking at the issues that this particular regulation deals with, I think that the fines are appropriate, because we must deter persons and we must ensure that what you do, we do things that end up in a safe situation in respect to persons. Right? There must be compliance. And if it comes down to that, then it comes down to that. Mr. President, I heard the leader of opposition business again in her presentation commenting about the 15 years practical experience as provided for in these regulations. If I were to start from what my research also brought to my attention. The Electrical Safety Foundation estimates that there are 51,000 electrical fires each year with 500 deaths, 1,400 injuries, and US $1.3 billion in property damage. That is in another jurisdiction. If you were to come to Jamaica and look at what our empirical data is providing, a report I came across from the Jamaica Fire Brigade informs us as follows, that in 2010, there were 1,000 structural fires. 2011, it increased to 1,381. 2012, increase again, 1,508. And to date in 2020, where we are, there has been 1,097 structural fires. The Fire Brigade tells us that 70% of these fires are electrical. Electrical. The Fire Brigade informs us that 50 to 60% of the electrical fires could have been avoided if persons had taken the proper precautions to use licensed electricians to do wiring or to check them periodically. So, Mr. President, what we are looking at is something that we have to take very seriously. So if a person is seeking qualification and to find themselves licensed to perform as an electrician or as the case may be, and one of those requirements is 15 years practical experience, I don't find it offensive. And then when we look at the regulations too, you have different categories, Category 1, Category 2, and Category 3. Category 3 speaks of persons having at least 5 years practical experience, and so does Category 2. Category 1, I am informed, is the highest category, where less of the work is done. At Category 3, 95% of the work is done in that category. Right? So, it is not keeping all persons, but it is ensuring, again, that you have persons, if you don't have the diploma to qualify you, that you must be able to show, if you want to be in a particular category, that you have the competence to deal with the situations that you'll have to deal with being in that category. And to give the public comfort, so that you don't have the experience as you outlined, Senator Motley, Scott Motley, where the person came in, probably highly recommended with certain years of experience, and was chipping away at the ice when he should have been doing other things. The registration of the inspectors and electricians, and I think you commented on it, it says that they are to be registered, there's a register that deals with them. I do hope that whatever is contained in that register is something that is placed in a space that the public can readily access it to determine that the persons are who they say they are, who come to do your work. In the regulation, I also noted, Mr. President, under Regulation 5.2b and Regulation 14.2b, which deals respectively with the licensing of inspectors and electricians, that those applicants will have to submit a criminal record as part of the process. In discussing the matter with some persons and just trying to get a feedback, there were some persons who, in giving me their feedback, indicated that, why the need for a police record? So, well, I wouldn't want somebody coming into my home as an electrician that I can't feel comfortable, does not have a certain inclination. So I think that to have a police record as a part of the requirement, I'm not opposed to it. Not opposed to it at all. We must have persons, and if you as an individual want to get involved in being a significant contributor to the society, just maintain your integrity and maintain your honesty in whatever it is, whatever sphere, then we will all be good. But where I cast my mind, Mr. President, is that in 2015, I think it's 2015, 2014 actually, 2014, there was an amendment done by a previous administration to the Criminal Records Rehabilitation of Offenders Act. This act was an act which was passed by Jamaica Labour Party administration. And I think it was brought to the fore by the Right Honourable Hugh Lawson Shearer. I think it was in 87, thereabout. That act was brought in to give persons who can show that they are rehabilitated a second opportunity. But in 2014, there was an amendment done to that act that brought in a third schedule. And that third schedule made certain offenses impossible, absolutely impossible to be expunged, regardless. And I find it a little difficult to appreciate, because I've come across certain persons who may have committed themselves when they were very young, at a young age, and turn around their lives, become virtual Christians, Mr. President, but they have a record which, because of the amendment that was made in 2014 by a previous administration, they cannot expunge their record and they are kept out of the formal system. Well, yes, as leaders said, it's something that I have discussed with Minister Delroy Chuck, and I think it is at the forefront of his mind and the Ministry of Justice that there needs to be an amendment. Because, when I look at it, and some of them are offenses that one would say, no, very bad offenses, but you have a few of them that I think persons can be given an opportunity, whatever system you want to bring in, so that they can show that they are rehabilitated and they can get back into the formal system. So when I look at the regulations that says police record, yes, let us keep it that way, but let us look at amending what was done in 2014 so that persons can indeed get a second chance. In respect to Regulation 30, which says that all first-time applicants for licenses for electricians would have to do exams. And I have been in discussion with persons from the ministry, but I would really like to see it published somewhere, whether from the regulator in setting out the guidelines as to how these exams should be done, when they should be done, so that we are certain that persons who are interested in becoming electricians licensed, that they are certain that, well, exams will be in March of a particular year and September of a particular year. It's not in the regulations, but I understand that it can be adjusted or it can be set straight in respect to guidelines that can be given by the regulator. I have been comforted with that. I did not see it, and my inquiries have led me to believe that, and I do hope that we stick to that commitment. And lastly, in respect to my comments, under Regulation 33(1)(4), where there is a requirement that electrical work or modification that is completed by an electrician must be inputted into the automated system, and certain specified information must be put there, one of which is the civic address of the premises. Mayor is not in the chamber, but it's something that I believe as local government practitioners, something that I've been advocating for from local government, because it helps in a lot of respects. That when you go around communities, formal communities included, you do not see, Mr. President, the tag on the gate as you would see in past days to say this is lot 30 or it is civic address 35, etc. Nothing is identified there. And you know, from a practical point of view, someone called me some years ago because they said they believe a prowler was in the proximity of their premises. I knew where the premises was, so I went there to give some assistance. No, I went with company. Yes. But you know, on my way there, I said to the person, call the police and tell them exactly where you are. When I got there, the person told me that the police drove past the premises 3 times because the police has nothing to look for. They can't see on the gate there is a civic address that says 35, 40, so-and-so street. Right? And when we're moving into this era where we're going to be discussing shortly again the needs, I believe, and the civic address is something that is critical to the needs, that we shouldn't be telling persons in 2020 in Jamaica, drive down this road and look for a pink house with a blue awning. The police, fire, ambulance, I mean, it assists. The postman delivering mail. The politician trying to give out voters' guide sometimes, Mr. President, in some communities. You don't know if it's 35, so-and-so street that you're at. You just have to be making several inquiries. So in a lot of respects, I do believe that we have to improve in that particular area and to ensure that we get things in a formal way, in a better way, in a more orderly way, as what this regulation is seeking to also achieve. Those are my comments in respect to the regulations. I do believe it is full-time and it is well appreciated at this particular time. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Sinclair. Senator Fraser-Vins.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I stand to make very brief comments on this regulation. I stand to make, is it any better? Yes? Okay, I stand to make very brief comments on these regulations. You know, Mr. President, a couple of months ago, and you know, everybody sharing little stories. I'll share one of my experience too. There's a particular plug at my house that we use for the microwave, and it just, in the middle of using it, it stopped working. And we could not figure out what was wrong. So I called a friend who is an electrician, and he came, and he went to the breaker, and he touched one thing. He said, turn it on now. And voila, it was fixed. I said, but what did you do? He said, the breaker jam. I said, huh? I said, so, you know, that's really what was the problem? He said, yes. And I marveled at it because in my untrained electrical mind, I could not fathom the problem. But here is somebody with lots of experience who came, took one look at the breaker.
Fraser-Vins, with the greatest of respect, it don't take a lot of experience to know to check the breaker.
Well, you know, I tell you something, you know, Mr. President, those of us who have no such training would not even think about the breaker.
No, in future, before you call the man that do a little electrical work, check the breaker.
But, so, you know, Senator Sinclair, I'm going to ask you to give me some protection. Because, you know, the last time you were in that chair, I did not need to ask for protection, but today the president is not protecting me as he normally does. But, Mr. President, the moral of my story with my untrained electrical mind is that the role of an electrician is so very important that oftentimes we don't stop and we don't think about them. And so I believe that the compilation of the Electricity Act and this regulation gives us an opportunity to really show the importance of electricians to our daily lives. And before I get into my brief contribution, I must congratulate former Minister Philip Powell, who was the minister who successfully piloted the Electricity Act in 2015. But I must also state my own disappointment, similar to Senator Sinclair, that it has taken us 5 years, for the regulations to come before the Senate. You see, Mr. President, this is just an indication of the many challenges we face in passing laws without legislation coming at the same time. I recall when I sat over on that side, there was a particular senator on this side who always spoke about it and the piecemeal approach. And sitting on this side, I have heard it again and again and again that it makes no sense to carry the Principal Act without the regulations. We have the Road Traffic Act that has been passed. I mean, the Disabilities Act, I mean, these have been passed several years, and we still have not had the regulations. And so, Senator Sinclair, I join with you and say we have to find a way to ensure that regulations come hand in hand with the law to give teeth to the regulations, because the law came into effect in 2015, the same year it was passed. But there's still so much that could not have been done because the regulations were absent. And I also want to say that I think it is Section 60 of the Principal Act also makes provision for the Act to be reviewed within 5 years. And so we are actually passing the regulations at a time when we should be reviewing the Act. And so, Minister, I am putting it to you that perhaps we could consider in very short order the establishment of that Joint Select Committee to review the Electricity Act. That being said, Mr. President, I do believe that this is a very useful and important piece of legislation. You see, and Minister spoke about the ease of doing business, because the truth be told is that prior to the passage of the Electricity Act, when one reads the ease of doing business, one of the things that always jumped out at you was the fact that electricity, or the generation thereto, how it was treated, really was one of the things that went against Jamaica's ease of doing business. And so the passage of the regulations today, I believe, will be another plus for us in the ease of doing business. And so I commend the government for passing the regulations. Notwithstanding that, I do have some concerns, Minister, and I pray for indulgence while I go through them. And not in any order, but I want to start with Regulations 27, which speaks to the penalty. And it says that the person who commits an offense under paragraph 1 is liable for a fine not exceeding $5 million. And, you know, Minister, I believe that the fine is excessive, and I don't know how much consultation was had with industrial players in arriving at this figure. I believe there was some consultation, but again, from just speaking to persons and players in the industry, I don't believe that the consultation was extensive. But the fine of $5 million to me is excessive, and I would want for that to be looked at. At the same time, Minister, I have a concern because under Regulations 28 that deals with the establishment of the Committee of Examiners and
examinations. It lists a number of persons who can sit on the committee, but I noticed that there is no provision for a representative from the body of electricians. Now, I know that there's no formal body for electricians, but what I do know is that the electricians are members of the Master Builders Association. And I wondered whether there would be a consideration to add that a representative from the Master Builders Association should sit on that committee. And if it is there, then I would have overlooked it. But I don't recall seeing that provision at all. And so I am commending that for your consideration, Minister, in terms of the composition. Because, you know, and I mean, I don't need to explain why that is important. If you're going to have a body that decides who becomes a member of the organization, then I believe that a representative of that grouping ought rightly to have a seat at the table. And I recommend that to you for consideration. Minister, the other concern I have has to do with how we treat with existing electricians. I note that there is a savings provision at Regulations 57. But I am not sure, and perhaps you can explain to me whether this will include existing, there are two questions. One, whether this would include existing electricians and how they're treated. I don't believe that this provision in itself does that. You can explain to me if in your mind and based on the instruction that I've gotten from the technical team, if it protects the existing electricians. The second thing as well is the registration of existing electricians. There isn't a carved out, Senator Sinclair, there isn't a carved out framework from my reading of the regulation that deals specifically with the existing electricians. So as I understand it, everyone, new and existing, will have to apply to be registered as an electrician. But these electricians, having had years of experience, then I believe there should be a particular treatment specific to them. So they shouldn't have to go through, I think it's at page, let me tell you, I think it's page, clause, tell you the specific clause that talks about the, right, here we go. That talks about what ought to happen, the examination, that they would have to undergo the examination and the written paper, practical assessment. And there is a good reason for that, particularly for new applicants, but I believe for persons who are already in the industry, there should be a particular framework carved out for them so they do not have to go through this rigorous testing. And I am commending it to you and your team to consider, because it is one of the feedback that we have received from persons within the industry. And while we're on it, Mister, I want to say one thing as well, and it's not legislative, but I think it's important to share. Just this week in the Gleaner, there was an article, I think it was the Gleaner, there's an article about Old Boys Club and a particular profession which I shall not name. They were lamenting that persons can't be given or can't rise to the level they desire, because there's almost like an old boys club that keeps shutting out the younger and the newer professionals. And I am hoping that, well, I don't know if there's any truth to that, but we do know that this happens from time to time in different professions. But I'm hoping that in this particular situation, that will not occur. And Senator Scott Motley mentioned it. I fully support the view that we need to review the third schedule, because it shouldn't be that you have to wait 15 years to be, pardon me? It shouldn't be that you have to wait 15 years for you to be registered. I mean, if you have gone through the test, if you have done 2 or 3 or 4, even 5 years of practical experience, then I believe that that should be enough. At the same, you're getting an echo?
It's not your fault this time.
Any better? Yeah? Okay. Senator Crawford isn't here, so Mr. President, may I? I think there's a little conspiracy going on at Senator Breakham. What did you do to my man? To mine and Damian's mine? Is it any better now, Mr. President? I'm going to tell Damian. Yes. Senator, Minister, I would say that I don't believe that they should have to wait 15 years for them to be given that final approval that they need to say, yes, I am a professional. And while I'm on that point, I have a question for you. I wondered whether the apprenticeship period would be calculated in what you call practical experience. So the requirement is to have 15 or 5 years of practical experience. Is the apprenticeship period deemed part of that practical experience that is required by the committee in making that determination? If it isn't, then I would recommend that it is considered as part of the 15 or 5-year or 10-year or 3-year or 2-year period, and that it is stated expressly that will be counted as part of the practical experience. At Regulation 23, it talks about the duration for this is electrical assistant, and it talks about the duration for their registration is for 5 years. And I think earlier in the regulations dealing with the electrician, the period is 2 years. And I wondered why the disparity and what is the rationale behind 2 years for the electrician and 5 years for the electrical assistant. So I crave your indulgence, Minister, if you could just explain to us the reason for the disparity and why is it that the trainee has 5 years as opposed to the trained who has 2 years. So I'm looking forward to an explanation in that regard. You know, Senator Sinclair spoke, and I have a note here about the ease of the regulations. And for the most part, it is. But Senator, let me just say that this is not the easiest of regulations. And one of the things that we're going to have to do is to break this down in very simple language that persons can understand. You know, no, Senator Sinclair, not everybody go big school like you, know. So you have to understand, right? No, well, listen, man, not everybody go big school like you. So work with me now. But not everybody go. For me, I honestly understand. We need to have a point of order or a debate about that, Senator Sinclair. It makes just sense, right? I just have two more points. Right. The issue of continuing education. Minister, the issue of continuation. I ask education again. I need, from my own understanding, and perhaps for the persons who are listening, whether continuing education is going to be limited to training, theoretical training or practical training that is given by the accredited body, or whether that will include training on the job through whether it's going to be the licensee, see, I'm even confusing, whether it's going to be by the trained electrician or someone else, or if it is limited to the teaching body. I believe that the issue of insurance, and I got some feedback about the issue of the public liability insurance, and I do understand and sympathy for them, because it is going to be an additional cost to the electricians. But I believe that what it does for me is it presents an opportunity for the electricians to come together and organize themselves as a unit, and there is power. I know that from time to time they come together, they formalize themselves, and they can then present proposals to insurance companies for public liability or for malpractice insurance. And so I believe that what it does, it presents an opportunity for the grouping of electricians that started some time ago, which has really not gone through, for them to put themselves together in a formalized group and give themselves better bargaining power. Minister, observations that this piece of legislation is a positive piece of legislation, because prior to this, it was very difficult. The system as existed was one where there was no predictability. There was often questions about electricians and who is licensed and who is not. And of course, that impacted on the quality of work. The passage of this, I believe, is symbolism to the industry. I long for the day when electricians will turn up with their nicely marked, whether it's going to be their polo or their Oxford shirt, but that is how they present themselves, so that they are seen as real professional and not just somebody who's just trying to eke out an existence or make a living, but as persons who understand the role and importance of their job and take it seriously. The rest is really up to the ministry and the government, and not just in terms of the level of professionalism, but the number of persons who are involved in the industry and the quality of service that is given. And with that, Mr. President, I am grateful for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Fraser Benz. Senator Brown. Just project as you're accustomed to do, Senator Graham.
Yes, so when I was a boy growing up, we used to have trades.
When I was a boy.
Yes, that's true. It's a long time ago, 15 years ago. And your guardian and if you didn't do so well in school or otherwise, or you couldn't afford it, you would be sent to learn a trade.
Yes.
And so carpentry, plumbing, woodwork, electrical work was one of those things. And when I look at the regulation, I remember this situation. It is a very useful way to allow young men in particular a second chance. A lot of young men, of course, when they go to school, the CXC didn't work out so well, whether because of their fault or otherwise, but they get a work in the construction and evangelist facility and gave us advice. So when I look at the training regime, it's important that it is so administered that it doesn't rule out these young men who didn't do well in school, but go and learn this trade and is intelligent enough and skilled enough to acquire the skill during this process. I think where it says a certificate in electrical installation, it didn't name the institution. I'm hoping that after a young man or a young woman who did not do well in the formal system but appear to be doing well as learning as an electrician apprentice would then be able to qualify through the hard program, for example, so that although they don't have CXC and O levels and so on, that if they have it and they put their mind to it and they allow those who were sent to learn a trade to eventually reach some high qualification. And I trust that the system will not be so operated that those categories will be excluded. Second chances in Jamaica sometimes are not plentiful. And this is a very good opportunity for second chances for people who did not. And I'm not trying to devalue this. It's a highly CXC is not the only way to determine competence. I just want to say that. And I think I can be bold enough to say a university degree is not the only way to determine competence. So people come up in different streams and in different ways. And so I'm trusting that the operators of the system will so run it that the young men and women who are coming through the trade stream that I find interesting and important is the fact that you now have an organized system of training, so I say a more organized system. It means, and it should mean, that whoever you are, whoever your connections, you should then have an opportunity to be able to get into the system, as against Braham, who is a master electrician with an electrical firm, and therefore because he knows Senator Lambert Brown's son get into the system, but Senator Scott Martin. And the third point I wish to make, Mr. President, has to do with the questions that I would be often asked by people, which would go something like that, either by telephone or when I see them. You know anybody at the electrical place, a pass house? And initially I didn't quite know what they were talking about because I know nothing about electrical business. But somebody's doing a little addition. You know, that too. A lot of people, of course, them just do them thing and connection work and thing. But when they want to go the right way, after a few months of waiting, they might buck you up or phone you if you know anybody who do that. And invariably, of course, I don't know anybody. Lawyers don't tend to know anybody in that type of area. But the problem about it, Mr. President, is that there was a certain amount of delay in getting their houses. And I'm just limiting it now to the man who's just in his house or just building a house. Delay, the temptation to go elsewhere and underground and above and so forth and sideways is great. And so I trust that with this wider training that we will now produce a greater set of persons certified who will then cause the delay to come down to a reasonable length of time. And the quicker it happens, the better. Mr. President, I hear the Senator Sinclair mention his own personal situation, but indeed it is a well-known phenomenon, and I wish to end on this third point. It is possible, and it happens in certain professions, that Braham could be sent, Mr. President, to look at the property, write up the report, comes back, and John Brown, who is a licensed person, sign off on it. It happens. There have been court cases about it in Jamaica. They have never been there. They never saw the electrical. Some of them never even see the plan, and them sign off. Sometimes I'm told that there are arrangements where, you know that I am a trained man. The exam on me didn't work out so well, but can you know me that I'm competent? I will look at the work, I sign it off, and I give you 10%. I trust this wider occur. Or should I say inspections will occur, and that there will be less or no need for delegates, Mr. President, who are unqualified to be the eyes of others, and so that it would help with the safety and it would get the system flowing properly, and it will create and enhance business activities and indeed help persons to properly have their houses supplied and electricity. Regulations, Mr. President, it is an advance, and I trust that it will be so organized that it will continue to be a source of income for a good amount of Jamaicans. We will not make it difficult and exclusive, and that it will continue to be a source where you can develop your skills, even if you didn't start out life with the qualifications that you would normally get secondary system.
Thank you, Senator Bram. Leader?
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And thank you also, colleagues, for your substantive and constructive contributions to the debate on what enhance the business environment and also help to satisfy the need for speed in excited young homeowners, as Senator Sinclair was, and of course, just, you know, citizenry at large who want to access electrical services. So there have been quite a few questions. I'm going to try to address them as best as possible. If I miss any, please, that the answers that I have are sufficient. I will start with the matter of the length of the license, 2 years versus 5 years. 5 years for enrollment of technical electrical assistance versus 2 years for the electrician. The issue is to allow the technical electrical assistant who is working at a lower level to have less bureaucracy in maintenance of his ability. So they don't have to keep coming. You're not required to have supervision, so you're out wiring people's houses, shops, and hotels, then you need to come every 2 years to ensure that you're properly certified. So that's the reason between the 2 to 5 year distinction. Regarding the matter of practical experience, or rather the question on whether apprenticeship will be part of your qualification period. So to be a class 1, first maybe is likely to be like a 2-bedroom house or a shop, small shop, that type of size project. So you're able to work on your own, and this is pretty much 90% of work is done at this level, class 3. Class 2 might be more at the level of a hotel. So clearly less work is done at this level. Significant experience required. The presumption is that if you are operating at class 2 level, you have already operated at class 3. And you remember, if you are someone who is working under supervision, so you are not out operating on your own, that's the TEA. So you're now not registered, and no one would have any reflection of your work. A voluntary declaration could possibly say what you have done, but in terms of your ability to operate as a registered electrician, it would not be. Experience will be as an assistant who is being supervised. I believe there is some consideration or some discretion that can be exercised based on what is said in your voluntary declaration. And of course, just to be clear, Class 1 is installation and construction of power lines and wiring of factories which use heavy electrical resources, high voltage, and extreme safety requirements. So if you have, they have your registration information already, and your transition would not it's not taking a fresh 15 years. But this, of course, is a matter from a policy perspective, knowing how these regulations now work, how you're expanding the system in terms of the number of persons who are able to now work, inspect, and operate under the new regime. It's the type of issue that can be revisited, but that is how it is expected to work at this time. There are maximum fines that are provided, not a static fine, and the terms of imprisonment are also maximum numbers. So the courts clearly have a discretion based on the extent, on the egregious nature of the offense, egregious nature. Regarding public education, there is an assurance that the ministry will be embarking on a public education awareness campaign, and this will be history. But I will state that there has been significant consultation, and even if you may have had conversation with one person who is a member of the industry but has a particular view, and perhaps him or herself was not consulted, there have been extensive consultations, not only with the electrical operators in the industry, but Professional Engineers Regulatory Board, Current Education, OUR, the Jamaica Institute of Engineers, the PSOJ, International Development Partners, and there have been town halls and civil society engagements to understand the customer side, the citizen side, and the social side of how these matters are expected to operate. So there has been there's really been quite a bit of work to ensure that persons have been engaged and that persons understand. And maybe that's why they're so well drafted and clear, Senator. So ensuring public participation and understanding of the industry prior to drafting these regulations. As had been stated earlier, by the way, the single buyer, self-generator, etc., as indicated, they are defined in the Electricity Act, although not in these regs. So those are set out in Section 2. And in respect of the access to information about, let's say, regulated personnel who are in or who are not in standing, yes, suspended, that will be available to the public. And of course, that will help, as anticipated, in persons assessing who is a person who can deliver these services appropriately. It's important for personal and public safety. So yes, this digital system will be very helpful. On the matter, on the matter of appeal in respect of Regulation 10, essentially, the decisions will not be taken lightly, and the opportunities can be provided to remedy the breach, and where it can't be remedied, then revocation and suspension would follow. But if it is that the license is revoked or suspended in those extreme circumstances, then judicial review would be the option that's open to someone who feels aggrieved, or the aggrieved. Queries, and just on the matter of transition, that's dealt with in 57B. So the broad, whatever license that exists now, it will transition for the remainder of the license that exists now. So while there's a 2-year period for inspectors to transition, whatever period you have left on your license issued under this current regime, as an electrician, that will continue to subsist, and then you will apply anew under this regime once it expires. So long you have, actually not a member of the Master Builders Association, but Regulation 28 does provide for at least 4 electricians to be on the board, on the committee. So that category is addressed while the Master Builders Association is not. And the Master Builders Association, as you hear, was one of the entities consulted, which is why I made the point that you may have spoken with someone who feels that things should be dealt with differently. But the association as a whole understands and agrees with these. Yes, I think those are the major issues that were raised. And so I do hope that they have addressed the concerns, and where they haven't addressed them, they've at least answered them sufficiently for your understanding of the intention. I think we're all agreed that, that the benefit of these regulations is clear for us all. 35,000 applications with 9 inspectors and people with the eye chipping in the back of your fridge, you know, achieve its 2030 agenda. So we again commend all the technical personnel who worked on these regulations, the staff from CPC, the staff from the ministry at all levels, and all the associations who participated in the consultations to ensure that as best as possible the ministry got it right. And with that, Mr. President, I ask for approval of the electrical work registration and licensing rates 2020.
Of course, and heard the question by the minister. Those in favor? Against? Minister Campbell? Just say thank you very much for all of those who participated in the debate. Thank you, Minister Campbell. Go ahead, please. Do a little electrical work.
Mr. President, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
Thank you. Members have heard the question. Those in favor? Aye. Against? Thank you, Minister.
For this Honourable Senate are the Callback Irrigation Area Order 2020 and the Callback Irrigation Area Order 2020 Resolution. The National Irrigation Commission Limited, a company incorporated under the Companies Act. Sorry, Mr. President. Under the Companies Act is Licensing Authority, licensing of the National Irrigation Commission Limited Order 2011, made in accordance with Section 4 of the Irrigation Act, and referred to hereinafter as the Commission. The Commission is also governed by the Irrigation Authority's vesting of functions in the National Irrigation Commission Limited Order 1990. The Commission is responsible for the implementation of the provisions of the Irrigation Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, in relation to all irrigation areas and restrictors in Jamaica. The Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries is empowered under Section 3(1)(a) of the Act by order to declare any specified area in the order to be an irrigation area for the purposes of the Act. The Act provides that such an order shall be subject to affirmative resolution, and the Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries on the 13th day of October 2020 declared Callback in the parish of St. Catherine an irrigation area. The declaration of Callback as an irrigation area is through the Inter-American Development Bank under the National Irrigation Development Program. And the irrigation system is located in the eastern region and comprises a subdivision of 95 farm lots on 110 hectares of land located in Callback, St. Catherine. These farm lots are occupied by predominantly small vegetable farmers, approximately 97 farmers, and water is supplied from a deep well pumping station in the area. And here I must, the Honourable Ken Boy, it was, Mr. President, who, as far as back as 2011, advocated for and got this program on its journey. The assets of the Callback irrigation system are as follows. A production well of capacity 1.2 million US gallons per day. well pump and above ground pressurized pipe network, including water meters, high pressurized pipes, valves, and other appurtenant works. The Commission will be able to fully execute its mandate once the area is officially declared an irrigation area. It is against that background I ask that this Honourable Senate gave its full show of support in affirming the Colbeck Irrigation Area Order 2020. And features of the paragraph 2, it refers to Part A of the schedule, which provides a description of the Colbeck Irrigation Area, as well as Part B of the schedule, which provides for the area as delineated by the map. The schedule to the order, Mr. President, schedule to the order contains Part A, the boundary description of Colbeck area, and Part B, a map of the Colbeck irrigation area. May it please, Mr. President.
Minister, are you finished?
Yes.
This area is not going north of Old Harbour. Sorry, I was addressing the minister. What you saying, Mr. Brown? I'm trying to get a mental picture of where it is. It's north. It will be north of Old Harbour.
That is in fact so, Mr. President.
Okay, thank you. I beg your pardon. No, you grew up in a place named Ginger Ridge. That's further north. So you know.
No. Mr. President, the opposition supports the resolution. We note that this comes pretty quickly after the one in Portland, and we wonder if there are more of these orders in store. I wish just bring them all at one time so we can have them. Agriculture and improving how we use water and improving the productivity in the nation. Strike me, Mr. President, that irrigation is a way of mitigating against drought and a lack of regular water supply. But the good Lord has showered us in the last couple of weeks with, deliberately, have showered us in and so much water that the damage to our infrastructure is multiple times the investment we're putting in this irrigation and in these irrigation orders. And I wonder, Mr. President, if in focusing on mitigation against drought through irrigation, if we have given consideration, Minister, to universities here and abroad, because in life, everything is bad and good. And it's therefore for us to look to see, in all this bad, whether it comes from Clarendon, St. Catherine, because there's regular flooding there too, whether it comes from St. Andrew, wherever it is in the country, that is there a way to harness all of this water that we see rushing through people's yard, and vehicles destroyed, even little Marcus Garvey Drive, Mr. President. As soon as there's a funeral anywhere and people start crying too much, it floods. It doesn't even require heavy rain. It just requires a big funeral attendance. And people start crying on Marcus Garvey Drive is impossible. And so, what I want to know is, are we giving thought to studying how we can harness these floods? I know, for example, the Water Resource Division, whether under Hardware when he was there, Fernandez later. I've spent some time trying to see how we can enhance our water supply. So with all this water rushing down Hope River and wherever else, is there a way for us to harness it, leading into micro-dams, so that when the dry months come, we the shower which we'll have had, reap some good from it by being able to store. And I therefore urge consultation with the universities and the engineering department to see how we can save some of this water that has been so disastrous to our country and turn it into good. Because if we just behave back in the days when we long past that, we're brighter than they were. And so the technology need to be honest. And my friend behind you, Minister Senator Webby, knows that there are work that has been done in the world that we need to look at to see if we can find the good in this bad. I know the government's faced with multi-billion road repairs. Mr. President, I grew up in Standpipe. There's a gully, but over time, they put in grinds. Now the sand is part of the Sandy Gully network. The former leader of the opposition, Dr. Peter Phillips, called for drainage program. Is it not time for us to look at these things to see whether or not what is now man-made damages, not bad for me, but affected the climate. So as part of looking forward, is there a way to study to see how we can begin to harness even the negatives, even from these negative situations? So I urge you to open talks with universities here and abroad to see how we can mitigate against those floods and turn them into benefit for the country. Because this night follow day, there's going to be periods of great sunshine, great drought, and then we get into things. I close, Mr. President, by saying we support this order, knowing that the farmers of our country have suffered. But sadly, when they suffer, the consumer suffers too, because the prices of goods are going to be going up as a result of the flood, as a result of the inconsistent supply, which is where the irrigation comes in. But we have to find a way to make the supply steady all the time, including utilizing the volumes from these rain when we have it. So when we don't have the rain, we can still have the water so that the farmers may benefit and the consumer may find stability in prices. It would be a win-win for the country. And let it not be said that I am thinking that it's the shower come all the time. So I'm not knocking your shower, but too much of the shower is not good for our people. May it please you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Webby.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise support of the order is really in keeping with the Ministry of Agriculture drive to provide a reliable source of water to our farming communities, which, as everyone knows, is vital for crop production. As Minister Campbell said, the Colbeck project is significant. It involves approximately, Minister Campbell, 95 farm lots and about 110. President and colleagues, I really want to take this opportunity to commend the Ministry of Agriculture and the Minister of Agriculture, the government agencies such as the National Irrigation Commission, RADA, Rural Agriculture Development Authority, and importantly, the International Development Bank, which have contributed to the execution of this project. Colleagues, the National Irrigation Commission partnerships, such as the parishes, with the most recent being done in FX Valley in St. Elizabeth. So it's very significant. Mr. President, I've said it in my capacity in the private sector and as a government senator, and I feel very strongly about it, that agriculture and agro-processing will be the primary driver to achieve economic independence in this country through food reminded us as a country of the importance of being self-reliant. Mr. President, as I've said before in this honorable House, I've challenged myself as a private sector leader and my other colleagues in the private sector that we need to set ourselves a target to reduce the food import bill. The food import bill as we speak is US $1 billion. And I'm saying by 2030, we need to reduce that to 500 million to achieve this objective. We must build our agriculture sector to increase production, to improve food security, raise productivity, and create sustainable value-added food products. The truth is, our farmers are key stakeholders to achieving food security, and the provision of adequate and reliable water sources is of utmost importance for crop output. We have witnessed from time to time that droughts, and I think that some years ago, Mr. President and colleagues, a collaborative effort between the Food Agriculture Organization and several partners found that rainfall variability in the Caribbean, resulting in excessive rainfall and extended drought, is one of the most challenging among climate change events for the society in general. Mr. President, according to the white paper on national water policy implementation and duration of drought conditions, if you look, Senator Brown, at the Jamaica's Social and Economic Survey of 2018, there were 20 more incidents of normal drought in that year and 8 more incidents of severe drought than the previous year, 2017. So drought is a significant problem for our farmers and food sustainability. Mr. President, on the other hand, climate change is also, over the past few weeks, we can all agree, the country has experienced significant excessive rainfall across the island. As one person said on the TV, they never see rainfall so yet. The truth is that the Met Office in Jamaica indicated that the 2020 Atlantic hurricane season has been the most active on record to date, and more rain is expected this weekend. So my point is, colleagues and President, that the agricultural sector remain sustainable. And the question is, and I think that's what my colleague senator is asking, how can we use the excessive rainfall to the farmers' advantage? How can we use the excessive rainfall for the farmers' advantage? Because remember, we are saying for economic independence, agriculture and agro-processing is going to be the primary solution. If you look at a number of research, rainwater can be made available to maintaining cropping and livestock systems throughout the normal dry periods or in situations of extended droughts. The irrigation services provided through the NIC, the truth is, requires, Minister Campbell, as you would appreciate, significant capital outlay. And while the work so far is commendable, other sources of irrigation, such as harvesting in communities. I therefore, Mr. President and colleagues, support the design of and/or strengthening of national programs to build individual farmer and community capacity in rainwater harvesting. If you have a look at the United Nations Development Program, for example, in its report, harvesting water, cultivating hope, demonstrated how sense and teach us 65,800 gallons of water for growing crops. 65,800 gallons of water for growing crops. And this was done as a result of gift of water storage tanks, conveyance systems, and drip irrigation hoses from the Japan-Caribbean Climate Change Partnership, Madam Leader. So in closing, Mr. President, my final point today is that we must also build which will allow our farmers to recover faster and when we have extreme weather events or acts of God such as this pandemic. I was very heartened, Mr. President and colleagues, when Minister Floyd Green, who I think is doing a fantastic job, announced the support of our farmers, of $636 million, such as seeds and fertilizer, infrastructure work to repair greenhouses and farm roads. So let us really recognize that the government, the Minister of Agriculture and the Ministry of Agriculture, they have heard the calls of the farmers and they are supporting them with $636.9 million. My other point as it relates to sustainability and food production, I really believe, and it final point.
Very good. Minister, 120.
Final point. One last thing before I come
1 minute.
down.
1 minute. 1 minute.
Yeah. Oh.
Mr. President, the time being almost 120 somewhere in the world. Might we be permitted to sit until the business of the day has been completed?
Members have heard the question. Those in favor? Sorry to interrupt you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. In 2018, Mr. President, and this is something that I think that we need to really put at the top of our agenda, the Ministry of Agriculture, they were having discussions, and I think they were pretty advanced, with the FAO to develop an insurance scheme for crop insurance and for livestock farmers. And with what is happening with climate change, I really livestock farmers. So, Mr. President, I am fully in support for the order. And I believe that the bigger picture, as I've said this afternoon, it's the goal of economic through agriculture and agro-processing. I thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Minister.
May I thank my colleagues on either side of the House, of the Senate, for their contribution. And may I specifically say to Senator Brown that I do not have the benefit of the number of orders which may be pending elsewhere. But it is something that we have to consider, and I'll make the appropriate recommendation to the relevant minister. Insofar I will commend them to the minister, and I believe that they're appropriate. We are at a point where the relevant studies are being done, and coming both from Senator Webby and Senator Brown, that the studies, I know that the studies are being done, and particularly as it relates to our water resources. Insofar as the surface water is concerned, the aquifers, Essex Valley, and there are others, and I know a number of them which are being financed by our international partners, are going on, because I think there's another one in St. Elizabeth adjoining the Essex Valley. And there's also another one in St. Catherine. So aside from the well stations, your recommendation as it relates to the storage of surface water, which we get during the the heavy rainfall season, is indeed. Against that background, I know.
Should have heard the question put by the Minister. Those in favour? Against? Minister?
Mr. President, we are now at that time, but I believe that there is a senator who may seek your leave on the motion for adjournment, and another who also has a point or two to make. Closing part of the day was to proceed. She's still speaking? If it is that, yes, I understand that there, given that it is Youth Month, that there is a desire to make an intervention.
Yes, I believe that there is a request for some intervention at this time.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, sorry about the misunderstanding, Senator Morris. If I could applaud you, I would as well, your maiden outing. Please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, colleagues. I could think of no better occasion to first rise to address the House than during Youth Month. And I consider myself not to be an exception, but rather one of the examples across our country of the potential that lies within our young people. And today, I want to emphasize, Mr. President, that the theme for Youth Month is Rethink, an acronym that means resilience. And I believe that the theme is appropriate as we have come to a point in our collective political trajectory where it is of paramount importance that we begin to rethink how we treat with future generations. And I believe, Mr. President, that as each generation is ushered in, there is an increased standard for improvement and making it has paved a clear path for young people or for future generations to follow. But I believe that it is essential, very important, that we equip our young people with the tools and with the experience and with the opportunities to pave this way and prepare for the future. And I believe that an essential component of doing this involves us leaders through experience training. And I dare say that if we're able to do this in years to come, then we will experience near utopic heights. Mr. President, a part of our theme for Youth Month speaks to knowledge. And I must say that education is one of the areas that we seriously need to rethink as we celebrate this occasion. Education especially being made more accessible to young people, because we see that the situation is becoming untenable. And I can cite the recommendations from my colleague in another place where he's advocating for the removal of GCT and heavy customs fees for educational imports. And I support this move because I find that many young people with university spaces are facing and bridging that digital divide. And I believe that this is one such effort that will allow us to assist our young people. And I want to offer commendations at this time also to private sector entities who have been making the move to supporting our young people by making contributions such as tablets and laptops, and also encourage others to come on board and do the same. And in a larger regard, I want to challenges as they pursue online learning. I want to say to you, young people, that you can overcome despite the challenges that you're experiencing right now, and further offer commendations to our teachers, to parents, to community leaders who are making strides towards assisting our young people in gaining the education that they need despite the unprecedented times that we are experiencing. One particular area or theme calls for us to rethink youth in business and providing opportunities for them to thrive in this area. Many times we speak of youth as the future, but young people are also the here and now. And as such, it's important for us to implement programs and support those programs that will teach our young people entrepreneurial skills and help them to build in this regard. So we spoke about our skills to move forward and benefit not just themselves, but the country at large. Mr. President, I also want to commend the programs that we have in place for our young people already, such as the HOPE program, which has assisted over 20,000 young people across the island. But my concern is that young people are not being given adequate dollars. And I believe that this is gravely insufficient to cover transportation and other costs that young people might have to face. And so I'm calling for greater support to be given for our young people as they seek to earn for themselves and gain experience. And finally, my last point touches on youth involvement in the political sphere. And I want to pause to commend my colleagues across the country for increased levels is that young people are more and more becoming a powerful bloc within the country. Young people are more and more becoming interested in seeing or in adding their voice to political discussions and issues that are of national importance. And if we were to look on social media, we will find that the hashtag Youth for Puerto Bueno is gaining more and more traction as young people continue in mind against the recommendations of NEPA. This, I believe, Mr. President, is one example of young people taking responsibility for their future. And as this trend grows, I believe that we must provide more opportunities for young people to engage meaningfully with those who impact their future. As I close, Mr. President, I urge all rethinking the way we treat with young people, rethinking education, rethinking opportunities that are available for the youth. And I believe that the young people of this country are ready to uplift Jamaica. And so I urge us to give them all the support that we can and help them on this journey as they move towards making their contribution to making a place to live work.
Thank you, Senator Morris.
Mr. Yeah.
Senator Campbell Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm recognizing you on your maiden contribution as well.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is with great pleasure and honor that I stand to make my first presentation here as a senator, and especially because I'll be speaking on the issue of youth development. As a former director of youth for Jamaica, this is an issue that is close to my heart, very, very close, not because I'm a mother, but because I understand as our future. And as such, we have to think about how to treat with the now while we look towards, the medium or long term. This year's Youth Month is being celebrated, as my colleague said, under the theme Youth Resilient through Entrepreneurship, Training, Hope, Innovation, Networking, and Knowledge. Quite a mouthful. When I saw it at first, I said, wow, that's quite a lot to process and it's a lot to read, but it is this month under this theme. But it is important for the rest of us who have passed the age for being considered a youth, even if in our minds we act as such. And I'm not throwing any words for anyone, specifically Senator Gale. Now, during this time of a pandemic, each human being must learn to survive in times which are not just different, but also trying. It pains me to see our young people on campus and how much they're missing out on just being young people.
That's what you need to do. You need to tell us. They say when you go to Geneva, what is in Geneva stays.
But this is primarily why this theme is so relevant, Mr. President. Our young people must rethink how they exist, operate, and think of themselves and ask. And I must pause here because for those persons who are deaf, hearing impaired, the masks are proving to be so difficult because they can't lip read. And so we have to think about these young people especially. It is even harder for them. We often think that young people prefer to form bonds virtually. And while this is true to a certain extent, the majority also want to lime and joke around together in their favorite meeting. But Mr. President, in the midst of the hardship, resilience is being developed and tested. Our young people are learning to be stronger in these unusual times, and that means it is a time for us as older persons to facilitate more training opportunities, time to rethink even the closure of some of our hard training programs, facilities in smaller communities, because that will help to limit for our young people to travel. Both want to explore entrepreneurship. They want to innovate and to network and to build their knowledge base. It is our job to make this happen as best as we can amid a pandemic, Mr. President. But by our, I not only am referring to the government, which is working to provide and facilitate these opportunities. I'm also referring to us as parents, as aunties and uncles, as older brothers and sisters. We must be mindful of not just the physical well-being of young people but also their mental, of being a mentor. Do so now. UWI, for example, has a mentorship program. See how you can be involved. Through it all, though, let us remember that we need to listen to our young people. We do not always know what is best for them. The days when youth development was premised on the idea that youth is wasted on the young, and that as long as us older fogies provide guidance, all will be well, is behind us. As is the idea that the youth are the future that I mentioned before. They are the now, with more than it is to dictate. Earlier this year, I met a young man who has all but baffled my mind and completely impressed me. My grandmother would say he's an old soul. I listen when he speaks. I call and I ask for his thoughts on certain matters, and I am the better for it. Back in the day, we wouldn't think so, because we must dictate and we know better than every young person. But that's not the world we live in anymore. As a former director of youth, I could stand here and hungry, most of us, it's lunchtime. But I also know that Mr. President would bang that gavel and ask me to sit. So I will end here by asking each of you, my fellow senators, to think of at least one thing you will do during this month of November to help one of Jamaica's youth to be their best self, help with their resilience and their hope while they think about or rethink their own lives. Thank you.
Acknowledge the two presentations previous, though I rise on a separate matter, which I've raised with the leader of government business. It is with deep sadness and concern that I recall that just 5 days ago, the country would have awoken to the news that young Constable Plum was set upon thoughts and prayers of all here, and I think I speak for both sides when I say that we extend our deepest sympathies to his family, to his friends, and to the men and women of the JCF. It is more concerning and even more disheartening that I regret to inform the Senate that just this morning we had a young correctional officer set upon in the St. Catherine adult, and I acknowledge it because his family has been advised. He's correctional officer Wesley. I ask you also to keep him and his family and his friends in our prayers. But it tells a troubling story that the men and women who have sworn to protect us in the varying security organizations and parts of our security architecture face deep threat and significant risk as they do power. To acknowledge these two fallen Jamaicans, both young men with bright futures who, quite frankly, are patriots, and I ask you and my colleagues to keep them in your prayers this weekend. Thank you.
President.
Thank you, Senator Samuda. Very sorry to hear that.
President, I rise sympathy and the condolences of the opposition base of the brutal slaying of Constable Plummer in Manchester, and this morning the correctional officer Wesley at the St. Catherine Adult Correctional Center. When I got here this morning, I got the news of the stabbing. So, Samuda, the information that I got. And while the Senate was sitting, we continued to share information. I make this point because some things are above politics. And there are some things we can cooperate across the aisles on. And Senator Matthew Samuda and I have cooperated a lot on matters relating to town services, because he's not to go public with many of the issues, but to try and resolve them. So the opposition expressed condolences. I have communicated with my delegates in the prison. I've expressed my own personal condolences to the family through them and to the officers who really feel it sadly to see what happened to their colleague who they had to rush to the hospital, who didn't make it through surgery. And it tells that lawlessness has to win the support of all of us in this chamber, in the other chamber, and in the wider society. We may disagree on the approach to tackling crime and lawlessness, but we are committed to the order. And whether we're in Jamaica or in a bigger place next to us, the rule of law and order need to be obtained. And even if you are president, these officers' family, may they rest in peace, but also may transfer of power be done peacefully elsewhere, because that's an example to the lawlessness of the poor people and the lower society. Presidents must set the order, peaceful transfer, obey the rules, and we in Jamaica must respect law and order and those who sworn to protect us. Senator Samuda, you have also
work for Parliament deals with the issue. It have the information for the session next week, Wednesday and Thursday. I'm sorry, Wednesday, 2 courts, morning and evening. So I'm urging you, get in touch with the Parliament and register for one or either. I participated in the Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, as we move the motion for adjournment, I simply add my voice of sympathy and prayer to the family of both Constable Plummer and Correctional Officer Wesley, their families, their loved ones, and of course their force members. And we stand with them, court. And as a people, we will triumph over evil, and we will take back this society and make it what it must be. On that note, Mr. President, I ask that the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed.
The question is that the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed. Those in favor? Against? This Honourable Senate now stands adjourned.